Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ann Arbor District Library's AADL TV YouTube channel. Thanks for tuning in for tonight's presentation of Exploring the Mind with the University of Michigan Department of Psychology and Dr. Rona Carter. In just a moment, Dr. Christopher Monk will introduce our guest. If you enjoy this program, don't forget to click like below and follow our channel for more AADL programming.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Chris Monk. I'm a professor here at the University of Michigan in the Department of Psychology. So I'm very pleased today to have Dr. Rona Carter with us to present some of her very exciting work. Rona is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology here at the University of Michigan. She received her PhD in applied lifespan developmental psychology in 2009. Rona's research is concerned with off-time pubertal development. So that is developing earlier or later than same-sex peers. So off-time development is a non-normative aspect of puberty that's associated with risk for serious problems, including depression, anxiety, as well as delinquency. So along similar lines, she also examines developmental tasks such as racial identity development, and psychologically threatening experiences like ethnic, racial, and gender discrimination that create resilience or vulnerability to conditions such as depression and delinquency. So Rona's talk is entitled, "Everybody is a Great Body, Body Positivity and Puberty." Here is Dr. Rona Carter.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that introduction. I am going to go ahead and share my presentation so we can, begin. Thank you again, Chris, for that really great introduction. Again, as Chris said, my name is Rona Carter, and I'm an associate professor here at the University of Michigan in the Department of Psychology. And I'm really happy to be here today to share with you some of my ongoing research on pubertal development, particularly in girls. And we know that this is a universal transition, but there are some noticeable fluctuations in that development. As Chris indicated, developing off time tends to be particularly difficult for girls and can lead to a lot of different outcomes. And today I'm going to be talking more about self-concept and this idea of how puberty can impact body esteem, and how there might be ways that we could help girls navigate these messages that they receive during the transition, so that they can come out with a better image of themselves and of others. So whenever I talk about this, my work, I always like to begin with this slide. Don't worry, dear, you'll develop like your friends soon enough. And we know that puberty is inherently a biological experience, but these changes that girls go through are often overt, and they connotate a lot of psychological and social variance. And as a result, the meaning and impact of puberty is qualified by the values and norms and cultures in the context in which that development is taking place. And one of the things that you might notice in this cartoon is that the lowercase b is sort of longing to be like these uppercase b's. She's a little bit sad, perhaps, because she is out of sync with her peers in terms of physical development. And feeling out of sync or feeling out of step with one peers can really impact her self-concept and her body esteem. What you also might see in this particular cartoon is that girls who are developing early are hanging out with their peers without parental supervision, and the lowercase b is not. And what we know from research is that oftentimes girls who do go through puberty a little bit earlier than their same age peers are hanging out perhaps with other peers and being exposed to messages that could impact their self-esteem and body image. And this is particularly sort of troubling because oftentimes girls who develop early they have a sort of older physical appearance, but they could be lagging behind cognitively. So they may not be able to decipher messages that they receive from their peers and from other sources about themselves and how they should be thinking about all the changes that are taking place. So today I'm going to be talking a lot about body image and body ideal during the pubertal transition. And, I'll start out by talking about how we sort of define body image, how conceptions of girls' body ideals sort of develop. I'll talk a little bit about the importance of thinking about these things during the pubertal transition. And then I'll end with some discussion on how girls can navigate these identity-related messages, what roles adults play in helping them do that. And so we'll end on that note. So everybody has a body image, right? It is the perception we have of our bodies, as well as the attitudes and feelings we have towards our physical appearance. And some people have a really positive body image and it can appreciate and love their bodies. And others may have a not so positive body image where they sort of dislike their bodies or think there's something wrong with it. Body image incorporates these thoughts or ideals you tell yourself about your body, along with the things you believe about your physical appearance and what you think what you should look like, and how whether or not you consider yourself acceptable based on the messages that you receive. And the thoughts and beliefs that you have about your body and your physical appearance, generate these feelings about your body and yourself. And many times, body image is confused with this self-esteem, with this idea of how you think and feel about yourself. That's what we think about when we think of self-esteem, but body image, again, is more about how you think and feel about your body. It's a concept or component of self-esteem, but very different from self-esteem. Living in a female body, a disabled body, an aging body, or a fat body, a body with mental illness, is to awaken daily to a world that expects a certain set of apologies to already live on our tongues. This level of sort of not enough or not too much is sewn into these strands of differences that we see across all of our bodies. And those differences are beginning to impact the self-concept of children, particularly girls at younger and younger ages. The expectation for apology for girls is during this pubertal transition when their body is changing, their ratio of body fat to muscle mass increases, and the body basal metabolism rate drops about 15%. And a person's weight is partially dependent on this rate. And so there's this normal weight gain that takes place during the pubertal transition as a result of these changes. And it's because of those different changes, the girl's body is changing that may not be consistent with how she believes her body should look. And these different physical appearances that girls start to have during this transition acts as a sort of social cue where there's a lot more pressure from their peers and adults in their social environment to conform to an ideal body shape that oftentimes for girls is unrealistically thin. But the interesting thing is that, these expectations about one's body being thin appears at this time, when we think about how children sort of think about themselves prior to puberty, during preschool, during childhood, children begin to recognize themselves, who they are, boy or girl, things like this, around the age of 2. But then around the age of 4, we begin to sort of compare ourselves to other people in our social environment. But that body image concerns around this age are usually focused more on clothing, sort of how you look in clothes, and your hair, how you sort of do your hair. And that's where you see more concerns. And sort of body size awareness tends to enter around the age of 5. But it still is only sort of focusing on being bigger. They want to grow up, and so they want to be bigger. So this idea of being thin, particularly for girls, again, it's not something that happens until we see signs of puberty. During childhood and elementary school, this is when we see a lot of the social cultural factors influencing the way that girls begin to think about their body. So much so that research has demonstrated that 42% of first through third grade girls want to be thinner. And then you have relative to boys who about 25% of boys want to be thinner. So even though they both have similar concerns about their body size, the percentage is much higher for girls. And then we also see that about 81% of 10-year-old girls are afraid of being fat. Again, thinking about these messages that they receive, they want to be thinner and they don't want to be fat. So much so by late elementary school, we have about 50% of girls are dissatisfied with their weight and their shape, and they tend to develop negative body self-esteem as a result of it. So elementary school, which is again around the time when most girls are going through puberty, is where body esteem for girls starts to diverge from boys. What we see in the research is that before elementary school, boys and girls feel sort of equally positive about themselves and who they are. But again, around the age of 11 or 12, the boys and girls scores similarly on sort of self-esteem measures, but you see this sort of increase, you see this sort of plummet rather in the self-esteem of girls starting around 12 relative to boys. The boys' esteem sort of remains the same throughout puberty as well as into adolescence and early adulthood, but the self-esteem of girls continues to plummet. And this is likely again related in part to the significant body changes with the onset of puberty. Girls tend to develop puberty earlier than boys, and Black girls develop earlier than white girls, and Latinx girls fall in between those two groups, and Asian girls fall after those two groups. So you can see that this age range is really representing a wide group of girls who are likely going through changes at different times, and it's impacting how they think about themselves. We also know that from research that 70% of 18 to 30-year-olds don't like their bodies. So this sort of issue around poor body esteem continues to develop, starting out again with around the age of puberty, and then continue on into adulthood. And so the esteem of girls relative to boys remain sort of different throughout the lifespan. Research has shown 60% of those in middle age, again, remain unsatisfied with their body. And, statistics like this sort of prompt us to wonder, how do we get here? We can all probably think of ways that we've got here, and I'll talk a little about those ways. But the idea of this sort of poor body image, what I'm calling sort of an epidemic, if you will, among girls or children who are young, is particularly troubling. And so what we know that sort of impacts the way that we think about our body is the society that we live in. And so one of the reasons why we see this uptick is that, in our society, Western society, the ideal body for females is to be thin, whereas males tend to be more muscular and lean. In our society, thin individuals are celebrated. We can see a lot of different advertisement that's take place in our society, equating thinness with beauty, and how they're sort of celebrated and thought of as having sort of rigid self-control in their ability to perhaps eat. Whereas individuals who are overweight tend to be more vilified and are thought of as lacking restraint because they're unable to reach that thin ideal that we believe women should have. And we also see that these social norms are maintained by reinforcing those who sort of fit this model, thinner individuals, and then punishing those who don't fit the model. Again, those who are much larger, the way that we are perceived in society, and the messages that you receive because you're not of that particular ideal. And, fat shaming has been going on for a very long time. In our society, fat shaming, sort of has been around since the mid 19th century. This poster here shows you it's the early 20th century sort of fat shaming and body shaming postcard that could be brought, you could buy at any corner store at that particular time. And so in our society, we've always sort of vilified or made fun of those who were overweight, and again, celebrated those who tend to fit the body ideal of women. And this is particularly difficult for girls to navigate all of those messages that they're receiving during the pubertal transition, because this process that we go through exacerbates the ideal body image norms that we have in our society. Girls are getting an increase in fat, as I mentioned earlier, and a decrease in physical activity. So they're going to be gaining naturally weight that is needed for them to go through the pubertal process. And boys, on the other hand, tend to experience faster and increases in muscular growth. And so in doing this, what this means is that boys tend to, as they're going through puberty, move closer to our ideal of what they should look like and how they should feel about themselves. Whereas girls are sort of moving away from that ideal because they're gaining weight, their hips are getting a little bit wider, they may be developing some breasts. And although these are sort of necessary changes that girls are going through, because of pubertal development and what it does to prepare children, girls for um, we need to have some weight gain taking place. But unfortunately, in our society, that weight gain can elicit a lot of negative identity related messages that include the thin ideal. And so, given sort of our society fear of weight gain, in some ways, it seems that as a society, we are not sort of adequately preparing girls for pubertal weight gain because we know that they are receiving messages that gaining weight during puberty is something that is not consistent with what we expect their body to look like. And again, this whole process, because of that, because we don't really talk about the weight gain that takes place during puberty and the specific amount, which is a large amount of weight, it could lead girls to having negative feelings toward their body. So to this appearance-based concerns, we sort of look at findings from a qualitative study on body image that support this sort of internalization of the thin ideal that might be taking place with girls and boys who sort of are going through puberty. If puberty is sort of moving one group towards their ideal and moving another group away from that ideal, this study really helps us think about how the internalization of thin ideal is being seen in younger children. In this study, it's pretty common for both boys and girls to prefer a leaner figure rather than an overweight body shape, as well as a strong dislike for being fat or overweight. In this study, both boys and girls also kind of use negative words when asked how they would feel if they gained some weight. And so they would use things like being scared or sort of ticked off or embarrassed or sad if they were to gain weight. However, only girls noted the importance of being thin, even though they had concerns, boys had concerns, girls particularly noted those concerns and indicated that it's important to be a little bit skinny, and I'm sort of glad I'm skinny and I'm not too fat. And when we asked girls, why might a girl want to sort of lose weight, girls would indicate things to look good, or so that when they're in their bathing suits, they don't have sort of blubber hanging over their underwears. And these are pre-adolescent boys and girls in elementary school. And so these messages about being thin and sort of nullifying or vilifying those who are overweight, we see some of these things emerging during the pubertal transition. And we know that one of the reasons why we see this internalization of the thin ideal is through the different social cultural agents that could sort of maintain and transmit those particular messages and reinforce those particular messages. So they tend to be transmitted and reinforced through these agents like the media, family, and peers are all sources of this these appearance-based ideals. And that's one of the ways that girls who are going through the pubertal transition are internalizing these messages and then sort of deciding how they feel about their body. These influences tend to work by sort of restricting the notions of selfhood available to girls and kind of forcing them to make decisions to comply with social and cultural demands that they sort of transform their bodies into this ideal shape, even though during this process of puberty, their body is moving away from that ideal shape. So they may be engaging in behaviors to meet that expectation. We know that media plays a big role in this. There's been lots of research that have looked at how women are portrayed in the media and sort of helping or thinking about ways for girls to be able to dissect and understand what they actually see in these images. It's not perhaps what is taking place but what is in real life. Research on elementary school girls who read magazines, they demonstrated that 45% of the girls, when they see these images, are motivated, they kind of motivate them to lose weight. They see these images and think, I'm not meeting this expectation, I need to lose weight. We also know that from this study, 69% of the girls said that the pictures sort of influence how they think about their body and what their body should be looking like rather, during as their body's changing during the pubertal transition. And this is particularly problematic if you begin to look at some of the other research, which suggests that the content of that's in these magazines geared towards preteen girls, they have the largest percentages of pages that are devoted to appearance and dieting relative to magazines that are geared towards boys during the same developmental period. So the media plays a significant role in sort of the girls internalizing this thin ideal, and given they are exposed to this quite a bit, we could see why media plays a big role in how they think about their bodies. TV commercials also play a role. So it's not just the magazines that girls are reading, but it's just watching a TV program or a commercial or a movie that, typically they feature thin and healthy looking women. And those people are typically celebrated, whereas when you are featuring someone who's not, they're typically the comic or the comedic who is in that particular role. We also know that women's magazines have about 10 times the content related to dieting and weight loss relative to men's magazines. A study conducted in Australia found that girls who saw these thin models on TV or in magazines, they felt that they weren't good enough, that they weren't pretty enough or thin enough. So, they want to lose weight, they want to fit this particular ideal. And researchers also sort of concluded from this study is that the media influences the way that they're thinking about themselves. But it's not just the media, it's the peers and family that are also reinforcing this way of how they should look in terms of their body. This particular picture on the screen is a 2014 Victoria's Secret campaign starring their brand, which the women are called angels. And this advertisement plays on girls' insecurities and sort of sends a damaging message by positioning the words, the perfect body across the models who have exactly the same very slim body type. And this marketing campaign is particularly harmful because it sort of fails to celebrate the sort of amazing diversity of women's bodies that we see, and only choosing to call attention to one body type, and then of course saying this is the perfect body type. And so again, these types of campaigns in the media could be particularly damaging for girls who their bodies are changing rapidly, and also their cognitive development is changing. We also know from this research that the girls wanted to reported getting a lot of diet information from magazines also, and then they reported this pressure to be thin from the media that they were reading. And as I said earlier, the media plays a significant role, and it's because a lot of children during the pubertal transition are engaging in some form of media a significant amount of time during the day, about 7.5 hours. They are exposed to different kinds of media sources, whether it's reading books, watching TV, studying, books, subject books from their school. All of those are considered media sources that could transmit messages to girls about how they should think about their body. So they're being exposed significantly to a lot of media with little help to help decipher what that means considering their body is moving in the opposite direction of the expectation in our society. So in our own work, we sort of was wondering if puberty books, like other media sources, sort of convey these kinds of messages. Do these books attribute meaning to girls' bodies? And we chose to look at puberty books because oftentimes mothers or adults in the child's life are typically purchase books for their daughter to read to help them process the changes that they're going through during puberty. And so it'll be important to sort of think about, well, what kind of messages are being conveyed in those books? And so we had two specific questions that we wanted to know. We wanted to know what messages about pubertal weight gain are present in books about girls, pubertal development, and then we also want to know what messages about body image are present in books about girls' pubertal development. And the books that we chose were fiction books about girls' pubertal development. And we wanted to make sure the books contained some kind of information about weight or body image. And so initially we had about 25 books, and then that was whittled down to about 13 books, given only 13 books presented content about weight gain or body image, and the other books neglected that particular topic, even though it's pretty significant when during the pubertal transition. But among those books that we did identify, the results demonstrated that messages in these books relate to broader cultural messages about weight and body image in the United States. The cultural fat phobia scripts were pretty prevalent in the books, and contrasting sort of this well-intended developmental message. You're going to be growing and changing, but you don't want to grow and change to the point where you're gaining weight. And so you saw this sort of, you're going to be changing, but you don't want to change too much because you may gain weight, which is not what we expect. So one of the themes that emerged from our content analysis of the books was this idea of defining and measuring health. How are girls getting those sort of fat phobic messages, as well as messages about expected weight gain? And so for this theme, we focus on messages regarding what health is. So what's the definition of health? How are they defining that? And how are we measuring health? What are things that we're using to measure health? So one of the books indicated that the best way to get an idea of your overall health is to calculate your body mass index, a ratio of height to weight. And this is a pretty common way that we as a society measure our weight. But what this message is saying is that somehow the weight is equivalent to your health, and as if there's no other ways of measuring your health. So few of the books actually have or gave a direct definition of health, and they sort of left it up to the girl to sort of define that. And because of that, girls may be left with this ideal that weight and health are synonymous, that somehow those two things go together, and in ways that we know aren't necessarily accurate. And using BMI as a sole measure of health is problematic, and because in the books we noted that the BMI categories that they used to define health had some kind of social meaning attached to it. We saw that they would indicate in the books, individuals with a body mass index in the normal or underweight range were portrayed in these books as healthy almost without exception, as if you're normal and underweight, you're automatically going to be healthy. But we saw that overweight and obese individuals were considered unhealthy solely based on weight, without consideration of other health indicators, like their fitness level, things like that. And so again, this ideal that weight and health are synonymous, and that BMI is a good indicator of that, is what we saw in the book. We also saw that there was this desire to be thin portrayed in the book. So that was another thing that emerged. And what we saw in one of the books was that the book noted that some girls were sort of blessed to have flat tummies. And so the desire to be thin was being conveyed in the book. And the books in our sample also suggested that, overweight or being overweight was equated to being sort of out of control, unable to control the amount of maybe the food intake that you have. And so they would say things like, even if you are overweight now, you can regain control over your health with some simple, consistent new choices. And so we saw those messages, being the desire to be thin and this ideal that overweight is out of control, being conveyed in those books. Only, 3 of the books noted that underweight individuals also were at health risk. But most of the books didn't indicate it was, if you were overweight, you were at risk for different things. And so another book indicated, well, if you're obese as a girl, you have a much higher chance of developing heart disease or diabetes as early as your 20s. So again, equating obesity to risk problems later on in life, but not really suggesting that underweight individuals are also at the same risk of developing heart disease or diabetes because they are underweight. So we also noted in our study that there were discussions of weight. The discussions that they had about weight tended to be more negatively framed, and weight gain expectations were really, really vague. They didn't really give girls a good sense of how much weight they should expect to gain. The books did sort of discuss this necessity that you have to gain weight. It's a normal process that you're going to go through during this time. And so some books did sort of note that, trying to normalize this and indicating there was some variation in when this weight gain would take place, but that it was a necessary process. And so one thing that emerged based on those results, we called it breast, butts, and thighs, oh my. And this particular theme really focused on messages that talked about what changes that will take place during puberty, the weight gain or the widening of hips or growing breasts, things like that, and the extent to which those changes will take place, the order of those changes, and explanation of those changes. And the importance of weight management was presented in quite a bit of the books, especially diet and exercise. One of the books indicated that because you will naturally gain more weight during puberty, this is a good time to begin changing your eating and exercise habits. So again, really introducing this idea of now you need to start exercising and dieting because you're gaining weight. So importance of weight management was conveyed. And the majority of the books gave sort of limited expectations of how much weight was going to be gained. They said things like maybe some weight is going to be gained, but not really clear on how much weight was going to be gained. One book also challenged the girls to reflect on why girls think that they are overweight, and when they are not. And so really helping them reflect on the extent to which they might gain weight. And so this book was what indicated, why do so many girls think they're overweight when they're not? For one thing, they forget about the pubertal weight spurt. When they're suddenly put on a lot of weight, they think they're too fat, but you're supposed to gain weight during puberty. So again, really conveying that this weight is normal, this weight gain is normal. It doesn't mean that you're overweight, it doesn't mean that you're fat. But few books indicated that. Most books equated this weight gain to something that was more problematic, and you needed to exercise or eat differently in order to reduce the amount of weight gain that will be taking place. Lastly, a few of the books focus on developing a positive body image. So there was some messages in there about body image. And so one book indicated that there's no such thing as one ideal weight, especially during puberty, when girls' bodies are growing quickly and changing shape. There's a wide range of weights that doctors consider normal for any girl, depending on her height and basic body type. And so there were some messages that were trying to convey this ideal that we have variations in body types and not one body type is the same, but we saw a few of those examples. And so what we realized from this particular study was that the messages in the books tended to be a little bit conflicted. The books will discuss that, girls would gain weight during puberty, but at the same time, that expectation of weight was very vague about how much they were going to weigh, and also they didn't really present girls with this ideal of how much they were going to weigh during that time. So these conflicting messages might be really particularly difficult for girls to synthesize as their minds are developing during this time period of how they think about the weight gain. Similarly, we saw that messages about how to promote positive body image were also side by side with messages which sexualize the developing body and sort of value thinner rather than larger. So you had these sort of conflicting and mixed messages that girls who are developing have to decipher and then figure out, okay, how do I feel about myself based on these messages that I could be receiving in these books. And the positive messages that we did see in the books, they may not be enough to overcome this pervasive thin ideal and weight discrimination that we have in our society, especially for girls, again, who are developing and may not be able to decipher how they think about themselves in a way that they can contextualize it. Um, we also know that family plays a significant role. So media helps with the internalization of these thin idea messages, but also the family does. A lot of body messages pop up every day in families based on what we expect they should look like. Parents often do this either directly by sort of commenting on the weight and shape of the girls, commenting on maybe their developing body, and some parents put children on diets to lose weight during this time, and some even engage in teasing as the child is developing. Or it could be done, in an indirect way by modeling. And so just like the girl is being socialized to internalize this sort of ideal body image, which is thin, so is the mother. So the mother is also being socialized to believe this way. So she may not be commenting on the girls, but she may be modeling behaviors that transmit that you should be thin, you should be exercising to lose weight. So parents socialize girls during this time, either in direct ways or indirect ways. The Body Image, which is this really great historical graphic memoir, really the author talks a lot about the messages that she received about her body when she was going through the pubertal transition. And she specifically focuses a lot on the role of her mother and how much her mother really helped shape how she thinks about her body. Some of the messages that she received was that women must be small, this idea of being thin, but also small so that you are more feminine looking. So she would say things like, your arms are getting so big, you look like a man, you look so unfeminine, can't you just swim less or strongly, don't be so aggressive, just swim enough so that your arms get thinner but don't gain muscles, or don't you want a boyfriend? No man will want to date a girl with big arms. So really conveying this idea that she needs to be small and she's not consistent with the expectation. Or she was also being told that you're too fat to wear certain things. So based on her body size and how her body was looking, her mother would say things like, you're too fat to wear that, or you'll look prettier if you lost 15 pounds, or you need to go on a diet. So really dissecting her body and making decisions for her about how she should look and feel based on the expectations that we have in society. And the really interesting thing about this memoir is that the author talks a lot about the notion that her mother sort of understood society expectations of women and tried to convey these expectations to her. But unfortunately, the way that she chose to do this just reinforced those same biases instead of helping her to navigate those particular biases. We also know that in addition to family and media, peers socialize girls during this time period to help them think about how they feel about themselves. And peers during this time, they appear to be a little bit more important during the pubertal transition than their parents are. Kids are typically in the presence of their peers more than they are in the presence of their parents. And so a lot of appearance-based related conversations with your peers are taking place during this time. There could be some modeling or teasing. Oftentimes girls who develop early are excluded from their peers because they look physically different. And There's also a perceived pressure to lose weight, and there's a lot of social comparison that takes place. This sort of process of thinking about how you feel about your body relative to the bodies of other girls in your social context. And so girls are engaging in a lot of social comparison, and it's through social comparison that peers play a really significant role in how girls are feeling about themselves. Another thing that really impacts how girls feel about themselves during this time period is ethnic and racial background, this ideal of the different kinds of social groups that girls belong to. Um, those equate different kinds of body expectations, perhaps, or behaviors that you should be engaging in because of that. So it plays a significant role, your ethnic and racial background, on how satisfied you feel about your body. Research has demonstrated that white women relative to other women, other racial groups, they tend to have lower levels of body self satisfaction, more concerned about their weight, have an increase in drive to conceal body size with clothing, and so um, we see differences. We see some effects of being in this social group and how it impacts their body esteem. Relative to African Americans, they tend to have low levels of weight preoccupation and greater satisfaction with their bodies. And then you also have Latinx women tend to have high skin tone satisfaction, so being satisfied with their skin tone. So you see these differences between these different groups based on the social group that they belong to, even though they are all women. Race and ethnicity is playing a significant role in how they think about themselves, particularly relevant to other women in that particular group. And it's possible that these differences in body image are based on these sort of cultural values or different beauty standards that different groups have. White women tend to, report greater internalization of those media messages, particularly the thin ideal and the influences that Eurocentric standards of beauty have. So they tend to internalize those messages a little bit more than other groups. Whereas African Americans, they tend to report, greater acceptance of their larger frame and their curvaceous body shape, and so they tend to accept this their body shape more so. And then you also see that both Latinx and African American women tend to report broader and more flexible body ideals. So definitely, as girls are going through pubertal development, the social groups in which they belong to will also impact their internalization of these thin ideal messages, and then how and shape how they sort of feel about themselves and the different changes that are taking place during the pubertal transition. So how do we end this? This is something that's been going on for a very long time, as I indicated earlier. The kind of messages that we are receiving about how we should look and feel about our body. The good news is that, if you were to look at the history of the ideal body image for women, you can see that those images change over the course of history. And the ideal body woman, the ideal female body that we see today could, be very different in the future, because we know that these ideals tend to change over the course. So there's some fluidity in how we think about our bodies. But the other thing that I think is important, that might help us sort of end these negative body image messages is to sort of reevaluate for ourselves how we see and think and treat our particular bodies, going through that sort of self-reflection process. And I think by thinking about the way we got here, is the way that we can begin to dismantle some of these messages that our girls are receiving at these younger ages. One process that might be very easy for individuals to go through is sort of thinking about your body shame origins. If you were to think back to when was maybe the first time you felt odd or different because of your body. Women typically indicate a number of these different things, maybe one of these things. Maybe they thought it happened when they were young, and during their youth at some point, or during puberty, or maybe they was attached to a story or belief about their value and worth in the world. So if you were to think back to those origins and reflect on it, you're likely to indicate some of these things. And these early experiences obviously shape your sense of worth and value and alter how you feel about yourself. And if we can think about these things, we can begin to develop ways to help change the narrative for girls who are going through puberty. If we know that our experiences developed at a certain point, that might be a point of entry, a point to intervene and change the narrative that girls are receiving during the pubertal transition. I think other things that we can do to promote positive body image to help girls navigate this during the pubertal transition is to focus less on weight and instead focus on behaviors and overall health. So really thinking about ways to help kids adopt healthy behaviors without focusing so much on we're doing this to lose weight. Helping children develop an identity that's beyond their physical appearance. One of the things that has been really successful for girls who are in historically marginalized groups like African American or Black girls is to have a good sense of who they are as an African American or as a Black girl. That's something that they're able to identify with different aspects of themselves beyond their physical appearance, and that allows them to feel better about themselves. And so we know from some of the work that I've done that their identity plays a role in the extent to which these changes impact their behaviors. And another thing you can do is establish sort of this non-tolerance of weight teasing, not doing the fat talk and not teasing about weight gain, something that if we were to think back, we maybe engaged in or heard and didn't intervene. Another way is again modeling behaviors. So as an adult and as a peer, trying to model behaviors so that children can then look at those instances and decide, okay, this is how I'm going to behave. So, avoiding extreme exercising and dieting, things like that. Not necessarily outlawing certain foods, everything maybe fits in moderation, things like that. And the last tip is really, talking, providing an environment with lots of talking and listening is something really, really important. And whether you talk to your mother about it or whether you talk to a friend about it, as adults, we can all use support to help us think about ways to help girls navigate the pubertal transition and sort of dismantle or change the narrative that they're receiving about their body. So, providing a supportive environment is going to be really helpful. Listening and addressing any unusual body related comments. So hearing the comments and then addressing them as opposed to ignoring them. Because when you ignore them, you send the message that, okay, that's actually the way you should be thinking, as opposed to changing the narrative and replacing the way that they think by considering something else. And again, helping to separate self-esteem from body esteem, because even though body esteem is a part of self-esteem, is a totally different aspect of who you are, and helping girls to realize that is going to be particularly important. One of the things that I've done in the work that I do here at Michigan is to culminate all these ideals into a educational module that is done with elementary school girls, primarily fourth and fifth graders in a local school in Ypsilanti. And what we do here is that we help girls prepare for puberty. So we talk about those changes. We talk about the expected weight gain. We also talk about the social groups that they belong to. So we focus a lot on what it means to be a girl or what it means to be white or Black or Latinx, and helping them think about themselves beyond the physical changes that they're going through. Because that's one thing we know could help them navigate the pubertal transition. And then we also, give them some coping skills, things that they could do, talking to a friend, talking to a teacher, talking to another adult to help them process information so that they don't feel bad about who they are and all the changes that they're going through. And so that's one of the things that we've done. And we've been doing the double digits program for about 3 years now in the IPSI school. So what's the takeaway, right? I like to say there's no such thing as a perfect body. And I tell my girls this all the time in double digits. When we talk about body, we pretty much talk about it during each session at some point, and it's conveyed during each module. We want to let girls' body appearance and health, they're really influenced during the pubertal transition by these social forces. And because girls who develop they may not be cognitively able to decipher and understand these things that they see. It can really impact how they feel about themselves. And so it's going to dictate how girls should look, and more than their self-esteem is going to be damaged. So more than how they think about themselves could be damaged. They could be begin to engage in behaviors that's linked to negative body image, like disruptive eating behavior, things like that. When you change the conversation with yourself, you will change the conversation for others. So again, engaging in that reflection process, thinking about how you think about your body and how you think about where those thoughts came from is going to help you be able to then change the conversation and the narrative for other people by going through that exploration. And I think the other takeaway is that we need to begin to interrupt the systems that um, um, perpetuate. I always mix that up. Body shame and oppression against um, all bodies. So these systems um, really convey that we should not be happy about our body, and they perpetuate these ideals. And because of that, this perpetuation is something that plays a significant role in how girls are feeling about themselves during puberty. So I want to thank you for listening to my talk. And if you guys have any questions, I would be more than happy. Or if you ever want to find out more about the work that we do here at IPSI, please feel free to contact me as well. So thank you.
Great. That was wonderful. Thank you, Rona. So I just had a few questions I was just thinking of as you went through that really nice talk. The first one is, so as we all know, like it takes a while for research to be able to catch up with the current situation. It takes years to actually do a research study. And so I was wondering if you could, because I would imagine there's not much research on this with social media, perhaps there's a little bit, but maybe if you could just speculate, you're talking about the messages that teens are getting from magazines. How do you think that relates to today with Instagram, YouTube, other forms of social media? It's a whole new ecosystem. And how do you think that may be related to teens now?
Yeah, I think a lot of teens are really thinking about how many likes they get. And so, depending on the different pictures that they post on Instagram, that really, how many likes they get from those pictures could really play a role in how they feel about themselves. If they don't get a lot of likes, they feel like, oh, maybe the picture isn't good, my body, something's wrong with my body. So I think that Instagram and other sources where we see a lot of pictures, and we know that adolescents are always posting pictures and different things that they're doing online. It's really about the likes and how much likes they get, and that's really impacting them. And the same is true for these other mechanisms like TikTok and Snapchat. It's all about the videos and things that you post. And if you don't post things that people like, it's really going to impact how you feel about yourself. And then you're going to also be looking at other people that you follow. And if they post things and get lots of likes, then you're thinking, okay, what's wrong with me? So now you're engaging in social comparison. And so even though we have different media platforms than we had in the past in terms of magazines or TVs, the same process is taking place. They're still doing social comparison. They're still deciding, how do I feel about myself based on what I'm posting and based on how people feel about what I post.
Okay, great. Thank you. And the other, again, I was hoping you could speculate a little bit. The other thing I was thinking of as you were presenting is the phenomena that, like, looking back over the last 150 years, puberty has gotten earlier as nutrition has become more prevalent, which is obviously an excellent and great thing. But it used to be a while back that girls would enter puberty at age 17, and now it's much earlier. And I was wondering, so there may be more of a disconnect between body maturation and cognitive and emotional functioning, brain development. I was wondering if you might speculate how that has perhaps impacted teen development.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, because it is something that's really problematic and troubling. It was just one of the reasons why I wanted to do this talk, to really talk to help folks really realize that girls are developing much earlier than they have in previous generations. And we see that there are racial disparities in that onset with Black girls developing earlier. And so because they're the earliest to develop, they're going to have to navigate these messages and these changes much earlier than their cognitive development is ready for them. And so I think that's where we have more of this concern. The girls look physically older, but cognitively they are lagging behind. And so because of that, they're not able to really understand and dissect the images and messages that they receive in a way to help them draw maybe different conclusions. One of the things that we do in our lab and through my double digits program is that we realize that it's really difficult for girls to even think about who they are and talk about that in ways that um, is, I think, helpful. We see a lot of negative talk around who they are and trying to understand who they are. They're not able to describe it in a way that you might see someone who's much older. And so we are constantly thinking about ways to better understand how girls are understanding their identity and who they are. Because of their physical appearance, the expectation is that they should already know this. They should be engaging in this process, but they're not. And
Yeah.
so we do a lot of discussions in our double digits program. We also do some qualitative work in the lab where we ask girls to think about what it means to be a girl, to think about specific changes that they're going through. What does it mean to get taller? How important is it for you to get taller? Those things to really help to really see where they're at cognitively, how they're thinking about it, and then finding ways to come up with modules or educational modules to then help them better understand the changes that they're going through and to better understand how they think about themselves. So I think because puberty is going through, girls are going through this earlier, they're again lagging behind a lot more with their cognitive development. And I think that's why this whole thing is particularly troubling because they're not able to really dissect these messages in a way that might contribute to more positive outcomes. So thinking about ways that we can be more supportive as adults and trying to figure out ways to come up with programs that we can do for girls who are going through puberty. A lot of the programs focus more on, they don't talk a lot about the physical development, the actual changes. They talk more about puberty equals sex. So there's a lot more discussion about the outcome of the development. We know that when you go through puberty, you're being your sexual reproduction. That's the whole point, right? So they focus on that in those education programs as opposed to helping them understand the changes that they're going through, understand that they're going to gain some weight, understand that they're going to be maybe taller than their other peers, and helping them to process that in a way where that could be a different outcomes. So a long answer to your question, but
Thank you.
but
Thank you. And so the last question I have is related. So I really was interested. I thought the findings you were talking about were particularly interested about race and ethnicity differences within the United States and what might be driving those differences. I, I was wondering, is there research outside the United States comparing other cultures and if there are, like, what those findings tell us? Like, is there research in Latin America or looking at this?
Yeah, I would suspect that there are some research going on outside the United States, and their research will likely look differently because of the beauty standards that they have for their particular country. I am not aware offhand of specific studies or research that have done that. There's been some work in London where they've looked at African immigrants relative to Native Britons and thinking about their body image and self-esteem, but I don't know of any other specific um, studies. But I think the important part of your question is this ideal that different countries have different standards for how they think girls should look and how they think boys should look and how they think girls should behave and how they think boys should behave. And each of those countries are going to convey those expectations to the children who are going through puberty because they're beginning to look more like an adolescent, more like an adult. And if children aren't able to, again, decipher those messages in a way that it has a more positive outcome, then it's going to be particularly problematic whether you are in the United States or somewhere else, because there are those different beauty standards, different expectations. And I think that's why we see those differences between whites and African Americans and Latinx, because they bring over those different expectations when they come to the United States. And that then they're left with, okay, do I sort of hold on to these expectations that I have about my particular group, or do I input these expectations about the home country or the new group, and then decide how I feel about myself? So there's this sort of options, if you will. And so those who are African American, if they choose to adhere to the expectations of their group or the out group, which might be whites or Latinxes, then they're going to feel differently about who they are, because those expectations might be very different from what the expectations are for your in group.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That was excellent. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions.